Well, welcome back to Sideline Ascent. I'm Taryn Sheehan, former Division I coach turned professor, mom, and also chicken wrangler.
And I'm Mike Marriage, former athletic director, coach, mentor, and somebody who believes the people shaping athletes' lives deserve real support too.
Sideline Ascent is brought to you by Mindset Curated and Morgan Athletics, two organizations committed to elevating coaches and the athletes they serve.
All right, first segment, hot take, trash take. My question to you for the day, all right? Question, coaches who complain about the workload just haven't learned to say no.
Trash take.
Tell me why.
Every coach wants, we don't know how to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a problem, or maybe that's not a good response. But I think we're used to, getting the job done. We're used to doing things at the highest level possible, and it depends on who's asking that of you.
Right.
When our athletes are asking that of us, it's hard to say no when we also know we ask a lot of our athletes as well.
Yeah.
If your athletic director, your boss, your head coach is asking you of something, you're not in a position always to say no. That's a really, really tricky dynamic. I think coaches need to do a better job of learning what those boundaries are, learning what your non-negotiables are. But I think it's really challenging, and it's really hard. I think a lot of coaches are on year-to-year contracts to begin with anyways. So there is always this element of the unknown. There's not a lot of insurances, and there's a lot of guarantees. And so, I'm going to go with that's a trash take.
I love that. I agree. I concur. And I look forward to, we'll dive a little bit into sort of setting boundaries and filling your own cup with our guests today.
Yeah.
So
I am so excited for our guest today. She has spent a career on both sides of the whistle as a coach and as someone studying the profession itself. She's an assistant coach for the Varsity Blues women's volleyball team at the University of Toronto, and she's also head coach Team Manitoba to gold in the 2022 Canada Summer Games. In 2022, she completed her PhD researching power dynamics in the coach-athlete relationship, coaching workload, and women in sports leadership. So she's not just living the job, she's one of the people studying them. Dr. Alix Krahn, thank you for coming and joining us, and welcome to Sideline Ascent.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Alix, welcome. All right, so we pay a little homages to our background. So the opening segment is called the Face Off, homage to my lacrosse background, and we're going to go three quick questions. They're quick hitters, fast answers. Don't overthink them. All right. So favorite sports movie of all time?
Remember the Titans.
Ooh, I like that. All right, good. I like that one. What would your walkout song be if you had one? Or maybe if you have one, tell us what it is.
Girl on Fire by Alicia Keys.
All right, I like that one. All right. Last question. What athlete's poster hung on your wall, if you had an athlete's poster hanging on your wall growing up?
For volleyball, it would have been Wanda Gwinnett or Janice Kelly. Those are two Manitoban, very specific volleyball players. And professionally, Michael Jordan.
Awesome. Excellent. Great job. Great job. Tara, over to you.
All right. So you were first off starting a volleyball player by trade growing up, an all academic, all Canadian at Winnipeg. Was the researcher in you already forming habits, or did that come later once you were actually coaching?
Such a great question. I really never would have predicted that I would have ended up in research of all places. And what I think I've always had is a genuine kind of curiosity, or what about that, or wonder, if you will. And I had the opportunity in university to cultivate that curiosity and figure out how to ask questions. I've also, I think, always had a love of learning. And so for me, it really took having a professor recognize that in me and be very supportive and say, hey, I don't know if anyone's mentioned this to you. I think that you're really curious. I actually think you have a lot to say. Have you thought about doing a publication or doing research or looking into more of the nuance that interests you so much? And kind of was like, no, like where do you even start? And it's like, well, you start with your writing. Like, how's your writing? And this course that this professor taught me in was a sport ethics course with 5 papers. So that made up the whole course, which for some students right away, like cringe, like they would have avoided that. And I guess for me, it was more the content of the course. I didn't even think about the fact that we had to write 5 papers, which was a lot. But in engaging in that process, I realized, okay, like I'm not half bad at writing. I'm not going to say I'm great. Even today, writing is probably the hardest part of the research process for me anyways. And I think it really took him just being like, hey, like you've got a knack for us. I think you could do this. Let's explore this together. And so we published a little article that like I read back now and I kind of cringe at how bold and like strong of statements I made in it. Just after going through my academic training, I'm like, ooh, yeah, probably could have worded that a little bit better. So anyways, but so it goes. But that initial opportunity and even just the chance to publish in a small little coaches magazine that who knows how many people read it. It was just a really awesome opportunity that allowed me to realize, oh, like maybe this was always inside of me. I just needed an opportunity and the chance to sort of apply the skills that I had. So I think both, yes and no, maybe like I had the skills there. I just maybe never had the chance to really apply them. And then as soon as I had the chance to apply them, I realized, oh, I love this. And oh yeah, like learning is my favorite thing to do, and asking questions and being curious and then learning the ways in which to investigate those questions. That became a really cool experience, because for sure my favorite part of the research experience is the getting to interview people. So It's nice to be on the other side of the interview for once.
Yeah.
But also just the chance to engage with people and learn from other people about what their experience in the world has been like has just been such a privilege and honor. So I think, yeah, maybe it's always been there. I just needed the right opportunity.
That's awesome. So would you tell us a little bit about your coaching origin story? How did that come about? And then as a follow-up to that, I'll give you, your curiosity and love of learning. How does that translate into sort of how you coach?
Yeah, for sure. So I think like most people, I started coaching little summer camps, and it was actually my coach at the time that I was playing for at the University of Winnipeg, Diane Scott, who really encouraged me to coach at the camps. Not only that, she again, at some point, like appointed me kind of like a court leader in the actual summer camp that we would run, and gave me, again, lots of opportunity. And, I think back and I'm not sure if I was any good at the actual X's and O's of coaching. I think that what my coach saw in me and appreciated at the time was an ability to work well with people. I grew up in a really big family. I have 4 siblings, and our family was really dedicated to community. So we were a very community-oriented family. So we spent a lot of time relating to other people, working with other people. So that teamwork kind of part of me, I think, has always been there. And I think that's what my coach originally saw, like, oh, she works well with people, she communicates well, all of those kinds of things. So it was those opportunities there that kind of started the coaching. And then, it kind of like the research thing, like you don't necessarily know you have a skill at it. And then you get a chance to do it and you're like, oh, okay, like maybe I'm all right at this. Like maybe I am okay at this. And then, from there, it was just having positive experiences. Like I think one of the things that kept me back coaching, this is really cute, but I remember this, as a part of those summer camps, on the last day of camp, there was an athlete who came and brought cookies for everybody, which was super sweet, and had made a special cookie for me. And it was my whole body with my jersey number and everything. And it was like, Coach Alix. And she came up and gave it to me. And it was just the most adorable thing ever. Like, I was like, oh my God. Like, and somebody said to me, like, well, obviously, like, you had a positive impact. And I think that was the first time I realized, like, oh yeah, you can have a positive impact doing coaching. So that's really how I started. And then after that, again, just like anybody, it was access and opportunity that allowed me to continue to pursue coaching.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that. Love that connection story.
Yeah. You make a really interesting comment there that I think gets missed a lot. And it was your ability to work well with others. And I was talking to a head coach recently that is struggling with his staff. And one of the underlying themes I feel like I see a lot of times is coaches have big egos. Let's just say that. We all do. We all have strong opinions that are good, and we all bring something valuable to the table. But oftentimes conflict can arise when coaches, we expect our athletes to be good teammates, to work well with others. But how often can that be missed amongst a staff, or isn't developed or curated enough or made as part of the focus? Like, what do you think the mentors you've been around have helped you with that? I mean, that was something that you're obviously very good at and valued by your bosses, but how do you feel that other coaches and staffs and mentors can do a better job of cultivating that on their own staffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And again, I think how you get there is recognizing who you are as a coach. I think one of the most important things as a coach is to know yourself and to know who you are and what you stand for, what you value, etc., so forth and so on. And that's actually a lifelong journey, right? Because when I started coaching at, I was probably 18, 19, 20 at the time, like, did I really know myself? Like, there's a version of myself, and I think about myself then and I cringe a little bit, but we're all on this journey, right? And so the knowing yourself piece, and I think that I was so fortunate to be around people who recognize those parts of me that maybe I didn't fully appreciate at the time. So like this coach recognizing like, hey, you're really good with people, and at that point, it wasn't even like, what is the content or quality of your coaching? It's like, when you work with people, they get excited, they light up. One of the little things, I am not a talented person by any means. The one thing that I've been gifted is a memory. So for me, when I do summer camps and when I work with athletes, I commit their names to memory so I know them, because there's no other like great feeling than walking in the gym and the coach knows who you are. So that was like one thing early on. I was like, I'm going to do that, right? I'm going to make sure. So there's that like people thing, right? So like I was always interested in the people. So how do you cultivate that in other people? I don't think, okay, I choose to believe that a lot of people get into coaching because they also enjoy working with people. Of course, we know that there are examples out there of people who abuse their power, etc. That's a different type of person. I'm talking about the people who get into it because they enjoy working with people. Even if that isn't your initial draw to coaching, at some level, you have to enjoy working with people. So it's just figuring out what works for you. What is it about working people that you enjoy? And if you understand that yourself, I think that can do wonders. So I had a lot of help from people. Another thing is like most recent as 3 weeks ago, before I went on a vacation, the current coach I'm working with, Christine Drakic, who's amazing, showed this book to me called The Culture Captain by J.P. Nurbun. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And again, the first half of the book is know yourself, right? So just another opportunity for me to like re-engage with the know yourself piece, and happy to report back that as I worked through that first part of the book, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is why I'm here. It's become more clear for me. So I think the more clear people are about why they're involved in coaching in the first place, that helps. And another thing I think about is understanding your motivations. So if your motivation is there for you want to get better, you want to be better, you want to, right? Like there's something about that probably requires a little bit more. You need to sit down and maybe think about that a little bit more, because my view of coaching is very much like a service. I'm a servant leader to the people that I work with. And if you're not that, you can do great in coaching because, professional high performance sport, which is so performance based, they'll take people who don't care about people per se, but care about winning and can achieve results. But those people, I wonder how those people are really doing. Like sometimes I wonder about how their heart and how their soul is, and are those people in touch with themselves? I think the biggest thing that helped me was having mentors and people around me who noticed my strengths, who called them forward, who said, yeah, you do this really well. Let's lean into that. And hey, let's give you projects that kind of associate with that. Being a head coach is really hard work. I've had the opportunity to do it. I'm grateful for it. There are parts of it that I do not enjoy. And one of them probably would be what do you do when you have a really difficult member of your staff who's not working well with people and who is there for their own ego? And how do you bring that person in a good way and maybe help them realize, hey, maybe this isn't the place for you, or it is, and here are some tools that can help you with that. I'm so focused on working with athletes that sometimes I think about that and I'm like, that extra work, especially that work that more often than not is with an adult who's, pretty set in their ways. I go, oh my, how many hours and how much energy do I have in the day? And, what can I take on? So I digress.
Yeah. Because, the head coach's job sometimes is not just mentoring the athletes. It's also sometimes mentoring their staff as well.
It's definitely a line in the coach job description, or at least all the job descriptions I've read, is mentoring staff 100%.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of work.
It is. It's a ton of work.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing when it works really well, but it can get really ugly if you do have those conflicting. But I think that's part of the great part of the job, and what you've talked a little bit about was sort of understanding your values and thinking that from a programmatic perspective as well. What are the roles, responsibilities? What's the mission statement of the program? We can use all these different terms. If a head coach hasn't done that work, it can go off the rails pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, trust me, I've lived both realities, and in some ways I marvel that I still coach today. But yes, I've lived both realities, and both are the totally. One where there's kind of nothing, you know what I mean, guiding, or there's stuff is loose. It can be a nightmare. So
100%. Well, still a lot to unpack in what you just talked about. So many nuggets in there. I wrote down, opportunities, knowing yourself, your values, and then the one that I circled was servant leadership. How does that present itself? I love that term. My coach used it when I got to know about the term from listening to my former head coach give a presentation, and there's a book that we'll put in the show notes about servant leadership that I've read. Can't get it right now, but I'd love to hear how servant leadership, how that presents itself on a daily basis for you in what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think if we break it down at its core, servant leadership is really about prioritizing kind of the growth, well-being, and could be professional development, but the growth and well-being of your team members, kind of above your own on a level. And when you get the opportunity to work with the age group that I've been working with over the past, it's been a while now. It's been almost 13 or 14 years, I think. That age group of those university athletes who are anywhere between 17 could be the youngest coming in, upwards of, I've worked with athletes who have come back and done master's degrees, for example. So 24, 25. Mm-hmm. Those are really pivotal and important years. Those are years where young people really need someone who can pour into them and who can show up and who can engage with them. And I think even more so today, we're seeing lots of people who are overstimulated and underregulated, and they need engagement. And they need someone to be present, and they need someone to prioritize their growth and well-being. The trick is how to do that and not lose yourself entirely and completely. And some people are better than that than others for a range of reasons. But one of the most important things to also cultivate alongside servant leadership is that, and how do I also serve myself? And how do I also take care of myself so that I can actually show up and be the best version of what I can be, which is ultimately going to help my athletes and inspire them. Right. And I've been fortunate to have like people ask me, they're like, what do you do? Like, how do you care for yourself? Like, how do you just keep coming back and being so positive or saying the same thing over and over? Like, where do you find the patience? And it's like, because I have these practices, one of which includes therapy. I'm super open about that, doing my own work. And that pouring into myself allows me to show up and to be able to prioritize the well-being and the growth of the athletes I work with. So, that's how I see it. And it's difficult because growth and well-being looks different for everybody. So what works for Tamara is not necessarily going to work for, Nikina, and so forth and so on. So, it's trying to figure out what is the most supportive to those types of athletes. And that's where I'm really thankful to be in an amazing team. So the team that I work with at the University of Toronto, we have an amazing integrated support team that our head coach, again, has put together, and we divide and conquer as best we can, because not every athlete is going to respond to me, is going to respond to Christine or Michelle or any of the people that make up our team. We need to find, multiple people if possible. And so in saying that, I just want to acknowledge that's a really privileged problem to have, to be able to have enough people on your staff to help care for the diverse set of needs that you have in front of you. Not every program is going to have that, right? So I'm speaking from a university sport lens, which in Canada at least is part of the high performance sports system. So I'm speaking from a space of having privilege and, again, access and opportunity to be able to support. When we know that there's a lot of folks in college level and high school and club level who don't have that kind of support. Yeah. So how do they do that? How do we help those coaches be servant leaders as well without burning them out and with giving them the support, et cetera, that they need? I think that's a really difficult question when we think about it from a structural standpoint, which is typically how I think about it. How can our institutions and our system of sport be better structured to support those people? Because yes, like I said, I talked about self-care, but that's a very individual thing, and that requires the individual to recognize that, and again, then have access and opportunity to be able to do that. And the reality is not every coach has that.
Yeah.
I just think that servant leadership is not just like a value that I have. It is a value I have. It is part of who I am. It's how I grew up. It's the family I grew up in, always serving community and serving other people. And also it's my access to privilege and opportunity that's allowed me to be able to be that way too.
That's awesome. I wish I had known that lesson. I wish I had spoken to you about 10 years ago. I was very fortunate when I was hired as and again, high school level in the States. My head of school, when I took the job, I said, "What's your goals?" He's like, "I want you to develop young men." It wasn't women. It wasn't winning. It was developing young men. And that took the pressure off, but you still feel that pressure internally to do good things, right? And it took me a number of years to be able to actually do my own health and wellness practice, to fill my cup, and I think that gets into a topic we'll probably talk a little bit about today, which is burnout. But that is super helpful and such great advice.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the advice I would give a young coach. I know that people ask me all the time, what would you say to a younger coach? There's a couple of things I would say, and one of them would be cultivate real good self-care practices, boundaries, having a small support group of people. But that self-care piece, you got to pour into you so that you can pour into other people. And unfortunately, I've tried it. It doesn't work the other way. So yeah, I think it's something that all coaches also, at no matter what level that we're struggling with. We're struggling with how to prioritize our team and make sure that they're being cared for, and also how are we being cared for too when the demands of coaching just keep growing. They just keep, the list just keeps getting longer and longer in terms of what coaches are now required to do. So
the other 90%.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit more into that. You recently came out with a study published in April of 2026 called I Never Take My Coaching Hat Off, examining experiences of women's coaches in sport working. And you and I have had ad nauseum some incredible conversations about the emotional labor, especially women coaches have. So rather than me talking about it, why don't you talk a little bit about what your work is finding? Because in my experience, the research that you've done has been incredibly validating for me as a female coach and the experiences I've had. And I know I've told you have to keep doing this work because oftentimes coaches are vocalizing these external pressures, internal pressures that they're feeling, dealing with the increased demands of the student athletes they coach. But how do you measure that? How do you go to your boss and your administrators and allow them to understand, if they've also never been a coach, how the industry as a coach is changing? And sometimes it can even be different based off of your gender as a coach.
Yeah. So I think I'll start with just saying, number one, the crux of the massive issue that we're facing is kind of what I already alluded to, is this constant overwork culture that exists in sport coaching. I can't remember the name of the study, but there was a study that came out back in the 90s that talked about the responsibilities of a coach. And they listed 6 things. I mean, I'm laughing because we look at that now and we go, 6 things. We go, what? Like my contract is 6 pages long in terms of like what I'm required to do. So we've seen a dramatic shift, even if back then it really was 6 things, which again, I would be skeptical of, but okay. So they deduced it down to these 6 things. All right. 6 things versus 6 pages. It's just the proliferation of overwork culture in sport coaching. And again, it's tied to this piece about service to others, right? When you are constantly trying to meet the needs of other people, that becomes a really, really difficult thing. So number one, overwork culture is rampant in sport coaching. And this affects everybody who's involved in sport coaching. So this affects men and this affects women, absolutely, hands down. The first part of my research, like where the origin of this publication, which I'm so grateful for now, but really came from, was taking it back to my dissertation, listening to the sport coaches in that research study who were predominantly men talk about the struggle that they were having in their private lives and their home lives outside of sport. So on paper, I might have a national championship winning team. How's your personal life doing? Not great. And or coaches making, and this was interesting, this one coach talking about, like, my wife and I really clearly made choices not to have kids. Like, we chose not to do that because of the demands of this job. Hearing a man say that for the first time, like, that was kind of surprising to me. I was like, oh, okay. And then of course I thought, like, well, he probably has an amazing wife who was like, listen, I'm not doing this on my own. So anyway, but regardless of where that came from, it was like, yeah, so this impacts men too, right? What I was missing were the women's voices. I only had one female coach in that study. So that was the impetus to do this research. And I was like, I got to talk to more women. I need to figure out the nuance that exists for them. Like, what's going on for them? And so again, we got to this piece of basically looking at the precarity of sport coaching. So that was that initial publication, was looking at the precarity of sport coaching. Precarity, just really quickly, is a very academic term, very, used in the literature to talk about what workers don't have. So the lack of rights, low salary, benefits. So what they lack. There's some really great books on it. Precarious Employment is one of them. Working Without Commitments is another one. Just talking about this prolific and rampant growth of precarious employment everywhere. And so I took that concept and applied it to sport coaching. And then the second step was applying, how is this gendered? What's the gender dynamic that's operating here? So what came up loud and clear in the research were the emotional labor piece. And again, it's not to say that it doesn't exist for men, because it would for sure. This study chose to focus on women's experiences. Somebody out there, please do the research on men's experiences of emotional labor. I'm sure it's out there and it's important to learn about. And also, we really need to shine a light on this piece that if we're constantly requiring coaches to do this emotional labor, that labor sometimes is more exhausting than the X's and O's of coaching. So another way that this came up out of that initial study was that these male coaches had female assistant coaches that they were downloading certain types of labor onto. If I ever have something difficult happen within the team between team members, I have my female coach deal with that. When it comes to recruiting and building relationships with athletes and parents, I have my female coach do that. I always have a couple of female coaches on the staff so I can say to them, like, did I handle that okay? Was I all right? So again, very, just these are people answering the questions honestly. And if you kind of look a layer below that, you realize that's a certain type of labor that's constantly being required for female coaches to do. And the piece about, again, using like females as a checkpoint, right? It could read as like, but they're not integrated in as a valuable part of the team. Like it could almost read as that. I don't think that's what this person was trying to say, but still it was just like an interesting, like, oh, okay. So we need to understand. And for me, it became really important to understand that too. What is the difference and how does that operate? And it's not to say that it's like, because I've had students and people say to me like, well, doesn't everyone have to do that? Like, isn't that just part of being, a coach? And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's the constant requirement of some coaches to be doing it. That's the problem. And because let me be clear, if I could spend all my time just doing, I think every coach would say this, but just doing the X's and O's and less of the emotional labor, like that's a way easier day for me. I'm going
so
home
much fun.
Way lighter. Yeah, I'm not going home and again, this is a phenomenon that a lot of the coaches talked about, and I'm not tossing and turning and I can't sleep at night because I'm replaying the situation over again. Did I handle that the best? Should we have done this? Should we have done that? Right? And then I have a terrible sleep and I wake up and I'm not better for anybody. So it was a really interesting kind of deep dive into that. And the next piece that's coming out is a little bit more on the side of how that emotional labor really impacted the experiences, like the physical health and the mental health of these coaches. So, how did it result in experiences of precarity for these female sport coaches? So a second part of that is coming, but I think the title of that paper really says it, right? I'm never not thinking about coaching, which means I have no boundary between my personal and professional life, and which means, I'm struggling.
Do you think that's why, and I know you're good friends with Dr. Lavoie at the Tucker Center, do you think that's why this year we saw a decline, or could be a contributing piece of why we saw actually for the first time in a few years a decline of those women head coaches out of 7 conferences?
Yeah, I do think it's a part of it. I think it's part of the story. And then I do think that there would be other contributing factors as well, right? Because there are many ways in which the system of sport has not changed, even though people continue to tell me, oh, but Alix, everything's getting better. Don't get me wrong. There are things that are getting better. But if we look at women in sport coaching, things are actually getting worse and have been getting worse for a while now. And I do choose to believe that the reason that some of those coaches are stepping away is because they're going, they're asking themselves, is it worth it? You know what I mean? I recently, again, and this is just in the past couple of years, a head coach at a prominent university in Canada in the hockey side, and just decided to go back to teaching because the quality of life, because I have small children at home and I want to be present, right? Everyone has their reasons. And there's a lot of women who don't have kids and who have also been saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want my happiness, my joy, my day-to-day life being dictated by 18 to 25-year-olds, fill in the blank, right? So I think that there's also another discussion that needs to happen here about safe sport and how safe sport has impacted the practice of coaching. And it's a really sticky and hard conversation to have because unfortunately, when folks hear it, their very first instinct is to say, well, coaches are 100% and entirely the problem with safe sport. They're the problem. And it's these abusive coaches. And you know what I mean? When that's not a full depiction of reality. Absolutely, there are coaches who abuse their positions of power who should not be in coaching positions. 100% support those folks being exited from sport. And also, safe sport is being used in a way now by athletes to get rid of a coach if they don't agree with, and there's examples of this in the United States, absolutely. I'm thinking like Becky Carlson and her podcast, which I love, the Fearless Coach podcast, is like one example. She's talked to a few coaches, in the United States. And then I can think of a couple of examples, here in Canada. So that safe sport, I bring that up because that also has had implications for the numbers of people who are in sport coaching. And again, I can think of it's really sad, but at least like 10 women in the last, I'm going to say like 5, maybe 6 years that have been removed from coaching positions because of quote unquote safe sport claims. And again, not to say that some of the claims weren't completely valid, etc. The response to just remove and so forth and so on. When, for example, one coach has been reviewed for by her athletes for over 20 years, never had a bad review, gone. Then I can think of an example in the exact same sport, male coach, been placed under investigation publicly at least 3 times, still coaching. How does that happen? I mean, right? So there are some things that are happening in that movement too that really intersect with this overwork and coaching movement. And there's no one really looking at the intersections of those. So, I want to do every research project in the world and I want to take that on, but it's just not possible. Speaking of overwork, but there's a conversation that really needs to be had there, I think is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. Alix, your PhD research looked at power dynamics, speaking of power dynamics and things like that, within the coach and athlete relationship. How does studying that academically maybe change the way you coach day to day? Has it? I'm really interested in
100%.
that.
100%. So it was actually my master's research that looked at that dynamic more. And my PhD was more on the professionalization of sport coaching and the gender division of labor within that. I think the power dynamics piece, why I was originally attracted to a research study on that was because quite literally at the time I was transitioning to coaching more and becoming profoundly aware of the power and the influence that a sport coach has. I think we've all heard of, that quote that a coach will impact more young people in a year than the average person will in their life. And you can read that, right? And you can be like, oh yeah, but until you've lived it, it's something quite different. That was one of the biggest, hardest realizations of coaching for me was, whoa, I have a couple of vivid memories of I've got 28 sets of eyes on me right now. And it is I could say anything and they would do it. And just kind of chill up your spine, just kind of for me anyway, I feel really kind of scared, uncomfortable. Okay, we're going to keep going. And then just, after practice, sit down and maybe reflect on that or write some notes on that, because that was just a really kind of chilling experience to have all these people just looking at you as if you have the answer and you know what you're doing, right?
Sure.
So I am grateful for those moments because they allowed me the opportunity to sit back and be like, what am I doing? and how am I doing it?
Yeah.
Right? I think of Maya Angelou as well. Like, people will forget what you do and what you say, but they won't forget how you make them feel. Right. And that's so important for coaches to reflect on their power, their positionality, how, whether you like it or not, it impacts what you do and it impacts the people that you work with. Yeah. And so how can you engage with sport coaching in a way that is acknowledging of that and that also like empowers the athletes around you? So I think for me, like very early on, a value of mine that became really important to me was like, I really want to empower people because it feels like I have a lot of it and this just doesn't feel right. And, I don't know what to do with it. I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm going to be the person who makes the substitutions in a game or who decides who gets to play and all those things. So there are some inherent things that come with sport coaching. And I do think it's possible to engage with it in a way that can be empowering for young people. So the power dynamics piece was really big for me because it was something I was living and then talking to coaches about their experiences with it. And then, also at the time, like I remember I've writing that thesis of going to my team and apologizing to my team for, the start of a season where like I was like, everyone wants to get better. We want to do better at nationals this year. Like we just have to train harder. And, so for like, I think 3 or 4 weeks, I was just pushing the team kind of hard and then realized like, okay, like I don't actually know if this is what they want to do. And maybe they just want to be here because they love sport. And so I need to like take a few steps back. I need to check back in. I need to apologize for being so, coaching the way I was coached and to talk to the team, like check in and ask for forgiveness. So that was like a really big moment for me when I was a young coach. And that was a really big part of realizing the power that I hold, whether I like it or not. In that position, there's an inherent power dynamic. And so how can I be a person who can use my power responsibly? And who are the people I need around me to ensure that when I can't check myself, that they can check me? I think that is critical and massively huge to have people who care about you enough and love you enough to call you in when you need to be called in and let you know, like, you're off here.
Yeah. Yeah. The get back coach, as I like to say. I was fortunate enough to have one on my team. It's probably the wrong term, but that scoreboard at the, it's not about you. At the end of the day, it's not about you, right? Like, and I think what you're hitting on and what I'm hearing you say is you're giving yourself to others. You got to fill yourself up every day in order to be able to give. But that scoreboard that's hanging there it can't own your personality or everything that it's about you. It's about giving out yourself to others. So super powerful.
Yeah. And it's hard to do when you're in a high performance environment that demands
100%.
you to win. And I'm not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect coach. Unfortunately, there would be athletes of teams that I've coached, like that Canada Summer Games team. We won a gold medal, which was amazing because it was made very clear to me that winning was our goal. And so there would be people who didn't have the experience they wanted out of it because the team goal was to win, which means that not all 12 of those athletes could play all the same at the same time. And so, and this again comes back to like being an assistant coach versus being a head coach. Yeah. To be completely honest, I'm just like, you know what? Coaching is so hard. And if I can take time at some point to maybe do a slightly easier route, which is more of the assistant coaching, at least in my experience, if you're working with the right head coach, because you really do need to be aligned, that can be a whole other side tangent. But, I'm just, again, like privileged enough to find myself an experience right now and an opportunity right now where I'm super aligned with the head coach and I get to assist her and help her, lead the team because she's doing an amazing job. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for
it's
that.
hard.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's not easy. It's not easy.
What I really take from that too is your ability to apologize to your athletes.
Yeah.
I think too many coaches are afraid that is going to totally wreck their power imbalance, that they want to keep a little bit of that power in that coach-athlete dynamic, and they are afraid that if they apologize, it means, they're going to lose the team. They're not going to lose their ability where their athletes listen and believe in them. But I have found the opposite to be true when you're wrong, the athletes know you're wrong, and it's never addressed. Like, that is actually when you lose them versus being able to own up to the mistakes. None of us are perfect. Like, when you're in pursuit of greatness, you're going to take some big swings, and sometimes big swings equal big misses. So we've got to be able to own up to the fact of, there's some days where I'm just going to get it wrong, and I appreciate you guys for being on board and listening, and I'm going to try to do better, just as, giving your athletes a chance to be okay that they're going to make mistakes too. Like, if they can see you fail gracefully, it's going to help them feel, I think, have more psychological safety in that environment when the coach is able to, admit to when they didn't get it right.
Yeah, totally. Lead by example too, right? If we want our athletes to do certain things, if we're not role modeling that, then what are we really doing? And we're coaching a generation of humans who are more aware of these kinds of things. Like, they can identify, like, that's what's going on here. And they need us to sometimes be vulnerable. And vulnerability can be really hard, especially with the way that we've learned leadership, right? There have been some really historical and long-stead beliefs that leadership looks a certain way. And I think the best thing we can do is continue to show that leadership is diverse. It looks different. It has many different ways of showing up. Everybody on your team is a leader. The athlete who's quiet, who is introverted, who maybe you don't think is engaged, they're leading in some capacity. I think everybody has leadership potential, and I think leadership is something that should be, diverse and open, and we should have different ways of expressing it. And I have to say, Taryn, the apologizing thing came from, I did a how you do one of those quizzes where you're like, what's my top leadership quality? And you know what I mean? It was very psych, and it was very answer a survey and it'll come up with these things. And, sometimes I really resist those things because I'm like, how can you possibly know somebody from just answering these questions based on how you're feeling in the moment? Anyway, so I did this leadership quiz, and I'll be honest, my top leadership quality, I wanted courage or bravery, or I wanted something like that to be the first thing. And the first thing that came up was forgiveness. And I thought,
wow,
I was unexpected, and took some time to really think about that, and really thought how, forgiveness is super important, and self-forgiveness too. Again, I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm not a perfect coach. I've developed and changed as a human a lot. And the ability to forgive myself along that journey has been important. And then to be able to ask people for forgiveness too I just think there's something that happens there. There's some healing that can happen there when we can do that. And so if we can share that gift with people, to say that it's okay to not be perfect, to make mistakes. And, one way that you can learn is, and you can grow from the experiences, you can ask for forgiveness. And there's a gift in there that I think, probably looks different for everybody. But so that's where that kind of came from. It was like, oh yeah, the right thing to do here is to apologize. Yeah.
So our bell lap, so to speak. What mindset are you actively working on right now?
The mindset I'm working on right now is connected to what we talked about, but is just the continuing to have boundaries for myself and to continue to engage in the self-care. How can I engage in the self-care and also care for the athletes? And how can I do that in a way that honors both? I think that is something I've been working on for a long time. But especially in this particular job, it is more demanding. And so how can I balance those two? And how can I, remind myself I know you just want to skip this because you just want to get that thing done so it's off your list, but you really need to commit to this thing that you said that you were going to do for yourself because it's important and it matters. So I'm really working on that.
Awesome.
Yeah. What habit has genuinely made you a better coach on the sideline or in the chair?
I would say one habit has been really developing good listening skills, understanding that I have 2 ears, one mouth. How can I listen better? Because if I can listen better, then I hopefully can understand better and hopefully will be able to meet the needs of the athletes I'm serving better.
Awesome.
Yeah. What advice would you give to developing assistant coaches, especially women in this profession that nobody gave you?
Knowing what you stand for and knowing who you are and what you value and not letting anybody get in the way of that. What are your bottom lines? What are your, nope, I will not have somebody cross that line. What are those bottom lines? Not giving away your power to somebody just because they have a title or they have accolades or they have, understanding that you have power too and to own your power. And with that, to make sure that you don't need a herd. You just need a small set of people, a small group of people who have your back 100%. You can call, that you can say, hey, this happened today. I need to process it. That they'll just hear you and support you no matter what. I think those 3 things, super critical. And I wish I had thought about them a little bit more when I had first started coaching.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
What's one book, podcast, person, or resource every coach should experience? Or one that you're listening to, reading, and liking right now?
The night table stack of books right now is just, at the top of the pile is like Decolonizing Sport. Underneath that is this Captain Culture book. Underneath that is Daring to Lead. Who would I suggest? I mean, I think that there's really some amazing stuff out there. I haven't been listening as much as I've been reading lately, just in a huge reading frenzy. So I think it depends on what the person is looking for. Like I said, I just discussed things that are institutional, systemic, sport level, and then things that are very personal to the individual. Right. I have such a hard time recommending stuff to people, to be completely honest with you. I think any of, the Tucker Center, what they're producing, they have fantastic resources. The sport podcast I would recommend to every human, and I recommend to my athletes, the students I teach, everybody I come into contact with, is Burn It All Down. It is a certain type of podcast, and for me, it is creme de la creme. It is chef's kiss. I love the critical dialogue. It's phenomenal. So I would recommend that one to folks.
Alix, thank you so much for being here and giving us your time. It's been great to get to know you, and I look forward to continuing the conversations. I know you and Taryn have had so many. I want them now, so I want in on the group. So, but you've given our listeners so much to think about, and I love the way your values really came through on this episode. So, thank you so much for giving your time and for giving the care to your athletes that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Sideline Ascent.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify or Apple Music so you never miss an episode.
And stay connected with us on YouTube and Instagram. We love hearing what messages resonated with you or who you'd like to hear from next.
If this conversation hit home for you, share it with somebody who appreciates it, a friend, a teammate, or a coach.